Alright folks, I'm here to try something new today. I'm going to rank all the mainline Pokemon games in a full-length edited video. A few housewarming things before we get into the meat and potatoes of the list. This is my first attempt at making an edited full-length video, so it could be a bit scuffed, and if you do enjoy it, give me some feedback, let me know what you would like me to change or what I could improve. I'm always looking for that. Also, if you hear some weird jingling in the background, that's my cats, Brutus and Nova. They like to fight and run around, and so don't be alarmed by those noises. And I want to say this is my third attempt at making this video. The last two attempts, the Pokemon Company has copyrighted and taken down my video. Any clips or video or footage I've used after Generation 5, for some reason they keep taking down. So unfortunately for the background video, I'm going to have to keep Gen 5 and under. I tried to sync up the games with the list I was on, but it doesn't seem like that's going to work. So sorry that I can't correctly sync up whatever game footage and whatever list order I'm on. So you're just going to get some general footage. Other than that, getting into the list, this is obviously subjective. Everybody has their own biases, and just like me, I have my own biases, and I've ranked the individual Pokemon in a tier list before, and I made videos on that. You can go back and watch that if you like that. But these are just going to be the mainline games, and I started in my first Pokemon games were roughly Emerald and then Platinum and Black 2 White 2, that era. That's when I grew up. So I'm slightly biased towards that generation, but I played all the games Gen 5 and under as a kid, so keep that in mind. As we get closer to the top of the list, I might have to repeat points as I talk about each game individually, like Diamond and Pearl are separate from Platinum on this list. I take into account every part of the game, how fun the playthrough is, the Pokédex, etc. I enjoy all the Pokemon games, so keep that in mind. So even the bottom games, I have a good time with. I've played them all roughly 3+ times at least, including I've played all the post games. And there's 22 games in the series up to this point. I'm filming this right after Legends ZA came out. I've only played that one once, I guess, but that's about it for the games I've played. Oh, also, I've never played Colosseum or Gale of Darkness, so I'm not going to rank those. But my main criteria before getting into the list, first and most important, is probably how fun the games are to battle through and how intuitive the battle mechanics are and how accessible good Pokemon and the quality of Pokemon for my opponents. Next would be how accessible it is to get a hold of those Pokemon. So Pokemon variety early in the game to build a bunch of different teams, how balanced the Pokemon are, and how many quality of life features the Pokemon have. So, like, do they have good access to good moves, or are the moves strong, etc. Third would be just the game's design, so like its music, the story, what the region looks like, how quickly you can play through it, that type of thing. And then the last thing, main point, is how well the game plays, so how quick it is the game full of glitches, are there a lot of cutscenes, is the menus intrusive, etc. There's some other things I'll talk about in each individual game. Every game has its own strengths and weaknesses, so I'll bring them up in each individual game. I'm bound to repeat points due to the fact that a lot of the games are very similar to each other. So like if I'm talking about Ruby and Sapphire, there's going to be overlap with Pokemon Emerald. There's nothing much I can really do about that, but I'll try to avoid too much talking about overlap. I just wanted to point that out. There's not much else I gotta say before getting into the list. I'm gonna have my biases like I said before, so keep that in mind before you go down in the comments and flame me. You can go down there and post what you think is different and what you enjoy. That's great. We should all disagree. That's part of being human. All that being said, let's get into the list now. Number 22, the Let's Go games. Well, it's not super fair to rank these games against the rest of them, since they're really just Pokemon Go spin-offs and they're really just a pipeline for casual players to get into the console games. They do lack a lot of depth, and the new abilities and the very simple design and the weird catching mechanics definitely hold these games back now. While the catching mechanics not really enjoyable, it makes sense. It is a Pokemon Go spin-off, and it is set for newer players to get into the Pokemon franchise, which, to be fair, it does its job well, so it's hard to hold that against it. But the lack of abilities and depth really do hold it back. The only thing this game really has going for it over any other game is I think this is probably the best looking Pokemon game, especially during the 3D era, even though it was the first Switch game to come out, which is kind of funny. The post game's okay, but not really there, and it's not a bad game. It's just not very replayable. I don't ever find myself wanting to go back to play this game. I'd give the game a solid 6.6 out of 10. Okay, but not someone that I would ever recommend to anybody who's ever played a Pokemon game before. Maybe if you are brand new to the franchise. Other than that, that's why it's the bottom of the list. Alright, coming in at number 21 is Pokemon Diamond and Pearl. These games are this low for a multitude of reasons. First of all, I would never go back and willingly choose to play these games over Platinum, or even their sequels that they came out with, which aren't great games in their own right. But the main issue that puts these so low is it's one of the most restrictive and abysmal Pokedexes in the franchise. While for a first playthrough you can get a pretty solid team, after that if you want to try to mix it up, it's really thin pickings. Because things such as like the fire types being so lacking in the generation is really rough. Like, you only have 2 fire type options, and that's just one example of what makes this Pokedex so rough. Secondly, the game plays just poorly. It runs really slow, and it takes forever, such as health bars. You can always look up the famous clip of close combating a level 100 Blissey. You'll be sitting there for 5 minutes watching its health bar drain, and that's not even an exaggeration. It takes like 5 minutes for it to drain. Lastly, this is just a general issue with the Gen 4 games as a whole, is how horrible the HM usage is. You're forced to use so many. This is probably the low point in the franchise of the HM issue. The main reason these games are below its sequels is this. The HMs are not mandatory in the sequels, which I'll talk about when we get to those. But that's the main issue. I think Gen 4 as a whole, though, is good. Like, these are the first Gen 4 games, so the physical special split is one of the most important changes in the franchise. I think it completely changes the game, and it's great. The champion fight is obviously awesome. I think Barry's a pretty solid rival, all things considered. I mean, at least battle-wise. Especially that last battle before the Elite Four is really cool. The story's good, just not as good as Platinum's. The game looks good. The jump to Gen 4 looks really nice. Plays well overall. The games aren't bad, it's just there's zero reason to go back and play these games. That's the main reason they're so low, is that Platinum gaps these games in every way. I'd still give the game a good 6.8 out of 10. Just play Platinum, to be honest. Pokemon Red, Green, Blue. This is where it all began. This placement isn't an indictment on the best-selling games in the franchise. Hardly that. It's more so these games feel pretty dated. And to be fair, that's what you should expect. They are a game-by-game after all. The graphics are pretty rough today, especially in 2025 when I'm making this. The movesets are really bad, and the game's not very well balanced at all. The Psychic type is extremely overpowered. The Bug type is beyond weak. And the Pokemon are really cool. They're the most iconic bunch of Pokemon, to be fair. And there's a lot of variety within the games, and it's probably the best of the early games. But the horrible movesets kind of make that Pokemon variety useless. You're just going to be spamming just weak or inaccurate moves, and things like Bind are just busted. Just the game's got a lot of kinks in it, which it's hard to hold against it. It's the first attempt. Things like the backpack are also a nightmare. The game suffers from a lot of glitches and exploits, which some people think are a good thing. I don't know. I don't particularly enjoy them myself, but all that being said, the game still amazes me, and I think every Pokemon fan should play these at some point to appreciate where it all started. And these games are truly unique. They do feel very different from the rest of the games in the franchise, and it's still a lot of fun, and it's crazy to see how much structure and precedence the game sets for the rest of the franchise going forward. Especially since how good that Pokédex is, that really helps these games. If they feel really unique, and you can really have a good variety. I think the rival is pretty solid, and the evil team is actually pretty good. The story's okay. I mean, for what it is, it's good. As this is the first attempt, I can excuse some of the poor aspects, but it doesn't change the fact that going back to play is pretty rough. Especially with no post-game. That really hurts the content. So, I'm going to give this game a 6.9 out of 10. Nice. Pokemon Yellow. Wow, what a surprise. Pokemon Yellow's here. All jokes aside, I don't got much more to say. It's pretty similar to what I just had to say, but it's got a more anime focus on the story, which I think it's more interesting, and you can get all 3 starters, which is really cool. And it's pretty much the same the rest of the way. There's some quality of life stuff, but nothing too crazy. I don't got much to say. It's Pokemon Yellow. It's just like the other games. Alright. We're on to number 18, Pokemon Gold and Silver. I don't want to beat a dead horse here on the old games, but they still are on old hardware, and they do feel pretty dated to this point. It is a true sequel to Red and Blue, so they feel pretty similar to those games, to be honest. I don't think the story holds up quite as well, and I definitely think the rival, though, is a step up. Yeah, I think it's one of the best rivals in the franchise. I think having a mean rival is a good addition to the game. And I think that the new additions of held items are huge for the game, even though they're fairly limited in their initial entry. It's hard to underestimate how important they are in the franchise moving forward. The 2 new types, Dark type and Steel type, sick. They are great in the franchise moving forward as well. I think the rebalancing of the types helps a lot. The removing the only one special stat, I think, helps with the balance of the game too, since in Gen 1, I know we didn't mention it, but there's only one special stat, and that helps make certain Pokemon a lot stronger in those games, so this is a big step forward in making the game a lot more balanced. It makes going back to play them not quite as jarring. That's what helps move it up on the list. But that doesn't mean there's still not a lot of issues. The horrible Pokemon variety and terrible moveset and all the new Pokemon introduced are pretty terrible. I mean, you can go back and look at these Pokemon now. A lot of them had to get extra evolutions, and a lot of them are still really bad. Not to mention the encounters were super restrictive, and you were stuck using mostly Kanto Pokemon through the games, which I think really hurts the replayability of these as well. On top of that, the Pokemon balance is just really poor. The gym battles, the first 3 felt good, but after that, the game's just a mess. The gym battles are all over the place. The levels are wonky. They're really low. It's just kind of an odd game to play. Especially once you get to the Team Rocket section, it's really tedious, really slow. I wouldn't really ever go back and play these versions over Crystal or Heart Gold Soul Silver. The only main benefit, and this is just the games in general for Johto, is it's got a pretty solid post game. There's a lot of stuff to do, but a lot of it's kind of empty calories to me. So I don't got much more to add to it than that. Overall, 7 out of 10 games. I wouldn't recommend playing these if you have any other option to play the Johto games, but still solid if it's your only choice. Number 17, Brilliant Diamond Shining Pearl. I know everybody's been chomping at the bits waiting to see these ones. While these are not very good games, and a lot of people have them as their bottom entry, to me, it's just a strict upgrade to Diamond and Pearl if that's a game you want to play. It fixes a lot of the issues that Diamond and Pearl had. First of all, there's no longer mandatory HMs throughout the game, so you can actually have a full team of 6 throughout the game. And the Grand Underground also makes it so you can have a much bigger team with a lot different Pokemon, with a lot better options. it being a later generation game, the movesets have been updated and the Pokemon are a lot more balanced now. And that's about where I have the good things end. The bad things is the Elite Four and Champion, they're a joke compared to the rest of the game. Like, the rest of the game's on baby mode, the team-wide XP share, which I think is generally a good thing. It reduces grinding. These games are not balanced around it. Does not feel good. And then once you get to the Elite Four and Champion, they're extremely strong, which I do like. Don't get me wrong, it just feels very jarring in these games, since how rest of the game is so easy. The friendship mechanic does not belong in this type of game either. It's extremely overpowered, and your Pokemon seem to get friendship really fast. So, overall, I think that these games are too faithful of a remake, to be honest. They should have taken a lot more from Platinum. As you'll see, I'm not going to spoil, but Platinum, you're not going to hear about that one for a bit. So, all the Sinnoh enjoyers, don't worry. We have an entry higher on the list. Overall, 7 out of 10. I still enjoyed these games when they came out. I just don't find myself wanting to go back and play them, especially with Platinum existing. Number 16, Legends Arceus. This is probably my most controversial opinion in this whole list, and I know many people are probably going to be upset with these games being so low, but I'm going to stand by my experience. I'll start with a couple positives, because I definitely think the new direction for the Pokemon franchise with a spin-off like this was great. It's a good change of pace, and I love to see innovation. I think the game played really well, looked nice overall, but a few glaring issues really ruined my experience, and it's the reason these games are so low. The catching system I did not enjoy. It's kind of like the Let's Go games. I thought the catching was kind of annoying and tedious, and it really dampened my experience, considering 80% of the game is just catching Pokemon, which I think can be fine, but I didn't like how they approached it. The story wasn't anything special. The professor quests were quite tedious because a lot of it had to do with, the catching stuff, and I didn't really enjoy the catching. So that's a main reason why I didn't like these games. Also, the biggest issue, other than that, is the horrible battle system. The agile and strong system were infuriating, and the boss battles were just stupid. Dodge and roll simulator while spamming whatever sponges or rocks, I don't remember what they're even called, the little sacks at the bosses, is super lame and just not fun. The boss fights were tedious and boring and really took me out of the flow of the game. The big reason why I don't have it any lower than it is just how innovative, and I am going to put it up higher because I know a lot of people do enjoy these games, so I don't want to take my own personal bias too much. But I'd still give the game 7.1 out of 10. I did enjoy the playthrough overall. I just didn't enjoy it nearly as much as everyone else. Just not a bad game, just not my cup of tea. Number 15, our newest entry in the Pokemon franchise, Legends ZA. I'm going to say right up front, I much preferred this over Legends Arceus, at least in my first playthrough. And it came out about a month and a half ago, and the DLC is yet to be released, so that could move it up or down this list, depending how good it is. I don't think it'll really change, to be honest. But the new battle style is even more out of the loop from the original franchise, but I think it's way more enjoyable than Legend Arceus' take on it. The real-time battling seems like a thoughtful sidestep from the formula, at least. I wouldn't want this to be the new style going forward, but I think for side games, I think it's a lot of fun. The new Mega Evolutions were really cool. The forced multiplayer to get the Mega Stones was kind of fun. And I actually really enjoyed the story. I thought there was a lot of funny characters and cool moments in the game, which normally I don't think of in a lot of the Pokemon games. And this is probably the first time in a while I've audibly chuckled at a character. But it has some critical flaws. First of all, the game's not very big. You're stuck within Lumio City. And a lot of this, there's a ton of side quests, which is good, but a lot of them are kind of nothing burgers. They're just kind of empty calories, things to do if you're bored, but it is nice nonetheless, I guess. The character customization is great. A lot of the games on the Switch have good customization, but this one seemed extra good. But outside the customization, the game didn't look very impressive overall. As you'll see, a lot of the ratings as of when the game was new complained about like the buildings being flat JPEGs, which to me wasn't a big deal. I didn't even notice it when I played, to be honest. But The main reason it's so far down this list, or I guess closer to the middle, is the boss fights. It makes me just not want to replay these games, to be honest. They're really tedious bullet sponges, and you just dodge around attacks. For the first playthrough, it wasn't bad, but you just have to do 3 of them back-to-back multiple times throughout the playthrough, and it gets really annoying and tedious. The rest of the game was great. I think the battle system was fun for the rest of the game, and I still would rather go back and play this over Legends Arceus, as going back to catch the same Pokemon is a little different than going back to battle, since ZA is mostly battles, and I much prefer that as a battle-focused player. I'd give the game 7.1 out of 10. Just a little better than Legends Arceus, though. If you prefer catching Pokemon, Legends Arceus will be what you want. Legends ZA is if you prefer battling. Alright, this is the turning point of the list at this point. We're on to number 14, Pokemon Crystal. I really enjoy, and I definitely think every single one of these games from here on out is a must-play. And we're into a lot of the better versions of the games, including this one. This is the enhancement of the Gen 2 games, and I definitely find myself going back to play this game over any other the Gen 1 and 2 games. I think the extra story points and Suicune really boost this game up. I think the quality of life changes, including physical changes. The game just looks better generally. There's a female playable character too, which is nice. It's always good to have more options. Other than that, it's not too different. I don't got anything more to say about it than I didn't say in the other games in the Gen 2. But if you're going to play a Gen 2 game, this is definitely the one. I'd give it a 7.2 out of 10. Go back and play this one. It's good. Alright, we're on to number 13, Ruby and Sapphire. I want to be upfront here. These games, more than any other ones on this list, are just straight up overshadowed by their other versions. So it's not that these are bad games, and in a vacuum ranking them, they might be higher on the list, but putting them in the context of the franchise as a whole, I think they belong here. Because I think both the Gen 6 upgrades and Emerald are just better than these games in every way. There's not much that they have that the other games don't. But, as they are the introduction to Gen 3, there's a giant leap for the Pokemon franchise away from Gen 1 and 2, which were kind of partner games. This is its own thing, and the new hardware and the quality of life changes really make these games hold up well. Like, they're good to go back and play even nowadays. The double battles and new Pokemon having abilities are great for the franchise. Feels really good. I still think the lack of physical special split dates these games a little bit. It doesn't make them perfect to come back to, but it's not that bad. The story is pretty solid. I think it's one of the better ones in the franchise. I think the legendaries are some of the best in the franchise, on top of the starters being really solid too. You can pick any one of the 3, though Torchic can be a little bit rough. But other than that, the games look good too on the new hardware. The general pool of Pokemon is also a lot stronger with this generational jump, and you have a ton more options. I think it's just a great leap over Gen 2. Some of the best jump of any one generation to another. But there are some glaring weaknesses. Like I said, the lack of physical special split does make a lot of Pokemon wonky, and it made them design a lot of Pokemon with BS stats going forward that would really hurt them for the rest of their existence, having high physical and special stats because their types kind of worked against each other. But I think the gym battles and boss fights in these versions specifically are not super strong compared to Emerald. A lot of them seem pretty unoptimized to me, and as the battles are pretty important, that really lowers these down on the list. And as the famous IGN review said, there's a lot of water, especially in the second half of the game when you're in the ocean. It just becomes really tedious and kind of a maze. Even to this day, I have to look up how to find my way around to certain areas in the water. And not to mention, if you don't have any repels, you're going to be in for a nightmare, as you're going to be running into Pokemon non-stop. But other than that, the pacing's really good in the game, so I don't want to hold that too much against it. What this game does have over Emerald, though, is a better champion. The Steven Stone champion fight, I think, is definitely a big step up from... Or I guess it happened before they changed it. I think it's a better champion fight. This team's really cool. I think featuring Metagross as the final boss Pokemon when you can't get it in the game is really neat. But in terms of the post-game, you're missing the battle facility, which Emerald has, which really helps Emerald 2. If Emerald didn't exist and this is a vacuum, I definitely think these games would be probably closer to like the 7th on this list, I'd say. But other than that, great games, 8.5 out of 10. Would recommend if you don't have access to Emerald. Pokemon X and Y, number 12. These were some of the hardest for me to rank on the whole list. That's kind of right why they're in the middle, because I think they're some of the most lopsided games in the franchise. Because certain aspects of the game I think are some of the best in the franchise, and some of the aspects are some of the worst. I think they have one of the greatest Pokedexes of any game in the whole franchise. Like, outside of the open world games, this is one of the best games for just getting different playthrough teams. It's great. And even on your first playthrough, everybody's going to have different teams, other than one aspect, which I'll mention later, which is really great. I think having a bunch of team variety is one of the most important parts of a Pokemon game. But there is a major problem with all this. It doesn't really matter which Pokemon you use because the game is so freaking easy. The boss fights are a joke, and this is the first game on this list that has a generational gimmick, and the game hardly uses the generational gimmick to begin with. Mega Evolutions were introduced in these games, and the bosses hardly use them, and you can hardly use the Mega Evolution. You get access to a handful of Pokemon, and the ones you get are extremely busted, and you get them really early in the game, and they really handhold you through the game as well. Like the Mega Lucario you get after beating the 3rd gym, which essentially has legendary Pokemon stats and ability. It's probably the best Pokemon you can get in the entire game, and getting them right after the 3rd gym for free, like they give it to you, you can't avoid it, is ridiculous. The fact that these two features go head to head is kind of crazy, because like, why would you use any other Pokemon when you get a free Mega Lucario that will curb stomp the game? And the game's already easy to begin with. And the region is fun to explore, but the controls are kind of clunky. This is the jump to the 3DS era, so it's going to be natural with the new art direction and the clunkiness. Sometimes some Pokemon look better and sometimes they don't. A lot of the flying all the time Pokemon don't look great. But the Gen 1 Pokemon also feel gimmicky here. Like, you get the free Gen 1 starters, like, no matter what. And they all have Megas on top of it, which is kind of cool, but the Gen 1 fan service feels a little heavy-handed at this point. And I don't think it's super healthy to give you a Mega Starter and a Mega Lucario that you can just use for the whole game. Like, it's one thing to give one of them, and giving them later in the game would be kind of interesting, but I don't know, I think it definitely hurts the balance of the game. The Fairy type was introduced. I forgot to mention that. I think the Fairy type's good. It's good for balance, though I don't like the fact that it resists Bug. I definitely think they did a disservice to the Bug type adding that resistance, but other than that, I think the rest of the type matchups make sense overall. There's a lot of things that I think they would have changed if they made a 3rd game, but there was probably time restrictions when they were making these. I think making more Megas available early would make the game feel less jarring with the balance, on top of just letting more of the other enemies use the Mega Pokemon. Like, if the other gym leaders use Megas, it wouldn't feel so overpowered, you know? But these games are truly unique, and I think these games are a 7.9 out of 10. I would recommend playing these, because you don't really have any other way to experience these games, so they're definitely worthwhile plays. On to our number 11, Heart Gold and Soul Silver. These are also probably a lot lower on my list than a lot of people's list, but I think these games have some very glaring issues that people tend to look over that dip them further down in the list than they probably otherwise would be. I don't want to repeat too much that I said in the other Johto games, but the game is horribly balanced still. They did not fix it, as well as you still have a pitiful amount of options for making teams. The physical special split definitely helps Pokemon like Totodile feel a little better, but that's the main reason why these are higher up on the list than their predecessor. I don't think these games added much more than them being, just upgrades. They didn't fix a lot of the issues that I think the games had overall, because they do benefit from all the quality of life that Gen 3 and 4 got, which no doubt does help. I don't want to take that away from these games. They do have great post-game still, no doubt. There's a lot to do, but like I said with the earlier entries, I think a lot of it's empty calories, and you still can't really use the new Pokemon introduced until the post-game, which I think is pretty lame. I think the Red Battle is awesome, though. It's one of the coolest fights in the whole franchise. But there is still just baffling decisions they made that really hold these games back, like I said before. I don't really got much more to say. The Johto games are just low on this list, just due to how pitiful it is to replay them. The games are slow, the Pokemon are weak, the variety is bad, and the movesets are bad. It just makes the games hard to play. Though, a first playthrough will be different. The story's great, the region does look really cool, the music's great, the game plays well. Like, the game checks all the boxes. It plays really good, but for an experienced Pokemon fan who's playing this game for a third, fourth time, there's very little reason for me to come back and play them. They just are brutal to replay. But on a first playthrough, it's probably one of the best Pokemons as a first playthrough, so keep that in mind. I'd give it an 8 out of 10. The games are solid. I know I named off a bunch of criticisms, but the games are still really good. I would recommend playing them all the way to Red at least once. I think everybody should. I think it's definitely a great time. Alright, on to the top 10. We got Sun and Moon here. Every game going out from here on forward is a banger. I'm going to have a lot more positive than negative to say. We're going to start with Sun and Moon here. Similar to Ruby and Sapphire, they just are kind of power crept by their upgrades that they get not long after their release. The Ultra games are just, better than regular Sun and Moon in every way. There's not that many differences. Some of the boss Pokemon are different, but in a vacuum, these games are great. And if the Ultra games didn't exist, I think these games are still awesome. But the main issue that a lot of people have is the cutscenes, but outside of that, I think the game is one of the most thematically rich and beautiful regions. There's a ton of different ways to approach the game, and the game actually changes the core formula up. There's no gym battles, there's totem battles, there's boss fights, and there's Kahuna trial captains. And I think all these are an interesting step up, and this is a much more difficult game than Pokemon X and Y were, which is a welcome change. They changed the generational gimmick. Megas are still in the game, they're just not the focus. Z moves are the new focus, and I think they're a solid generational gimmick. They don't really alter the game too much, and the bosses actually use them quite a bit, which I think is nice. It fits the game well overall. The Pokédex is great. All the new Pokemon are really cool. I like the new Alolan forms. I think that's a great way to give a fresh coat of paint to some older Pokemon that felt pretty underwhelming at this point in the franchise. And the Pokédex is solid, but there's a reason there's a big gap between these and the Ultra games, as you'll see. The upgraded Pokédex is a lot better in the Ultra games, I will say. And other than the criminally long story and the criminally long intro and the unskippable cutscenes, the game's great. Those games are glaring issues, though. That's what holds these games back. That's why they're so low here. But other than that, there's a lot of quality of life features that come in these games. The removal of mandatory HMs is massive, and continuing like Gen 6, the team-wide XP share I think is good for the games going forward. It just doesn't make much sense retroactively adding it to old games. And since you're not forced to run an HM user, You're allowed to use other Pokemon, you know, like you don't have to run a water type that just only knows surf and dive and waterfall, etc. And then you don't have to give your starter rock smash that they're stuck with for the whole game. The customization was good, just like in X and Y for your character. The rival was kind of samey in these games, but pretty good overall. I like the final rival battle to become champion, is really cool. A thing that these games do badly, though, is some of the Pokemon can't evolve until Victory Road because of an arbitrary location restriction, which the Ultra games do fix. That's also another reason why these are low. Nonetheless, I'd give these games 8.7 out of 10. I'd highly recommend playing these games if you've never played any Gen 7 game. They're a great time. Alright, number 9, Fire Red and Leaf Green. This is definitely the definitive and best version of Kanto Pokemon, and it's one of the best games they've ever made. This game feels substantially more balanced and way better than its original forms. Obviously, it's in Gen 3 now, so it has all the quality of life features that you get within Gen 3. It's got a much better pacing, and even compared to Let's Go Eevee and Pikachu, the game feels a lot better balanced than those games. Other than the lack of physical special split, that's about all that Let's Go and Eevee and Pikachu could even say they have. You're still in Kanto, so you're limited to the Kanto Pokédex, which is fine. It's a good Pokédex, don't get me wrong. It just, you know, you only have those. And now you have the Sevi Islands to do, which is a pretty fun piece of content. There's not much more I have to say. These are Kanto games. Everybody knows what's going on in them. I mean, if someone is brand new to Pokemon and they're looking to play a classic Pokemon game, this is a great place to start, and probably the one I'd recommend. Overall, 8.8 out of 10. Number 8, Omega Ruby Alpha Sapphire. These games are a remix of Ruby and Sapphire, which I really enjoyed. And they're just direct upgrades, so overall, solid games. They now have the physical special split, and the new quality of life features and the fairy type come with them being really good. And I guess that's part of just being a Gen 6 game. The new Mega Evolutions they added to the game make some of the boss fights a lot cooler. The new TMs and HMs are a much bigger upgrade as well. I really like how they allow you to not feel so guilty about using your TMs early in the game, especially. Though they do have issues over their original counterparts, just like in X and Y. They give you a legendary Mega Evolution after like the 5th gym, and other than to challenge yourself, there's no reason to not use it and to steamroll the game with it, which I think is pretty lame. But other than that, the Pokemon features, they also added the Navdex, which is pretty nice for catching Pokemon. The post-game's really cool, the Delta episode's really fun. The game's great overall. There's not much negative or positive different from the originals that I haven't said. If I'm going to pick a Hoenn game, I might occasionally pick these games over Emerald. So, 8.9 out of 10 good games. Number 7, Pokemon Black and White. These games are phenomenal. Hands down, one of the greatest Pokemon games made. And if they were on their own in a vacuum, I would probably have them higher as well. But Black and White 2 exist, and I definitely think they are upgrades, even though they're not like the other sequels on the list. And if we're only talking about first playthroughs only, and not the scope of the franchise, this would be a top game, definitely. The replayability is definitely hurt, though, by things I'll mention later. The boss fights and gym battles are really solid, well crafted, and I really like their personalities. The Elite Four and the Champion fight is really cool, and the fact that the Champion fight is like a post-game thing, and the real final nail in the coffin for the game is 2 back-to-back boss fights to finish off the story. That makes these games very unique. The limited Pokédex is kind of lame, but it's kind of charming at the same time. It feels very different from every other game in the franchise, and I think it works for and against it. It depends who you ask. The limited Pokédex makes it fun for a first playthrough, but limited in a second. It's part of the reason why this is slipped further down, which its successor does differently, and that's why it's higher on the list. This is also the first generation that tried to reboot the series and had its own Pokédex. That's good and bad, and this is the first Gen 5 game, so there is more quality of life. There's now secret abilities that every Pokemon has, which is really good for competitive, and this is really the beginning of competitive Pokemon generally, which I think is pretty awesome. Other than that, I don't got much to say that I'm not going to mention in its sequel. The Gen 5 games are awesome, and I would recommend it to any new Pokemon fan, and this is a fun place to start the series if you're looking for getting into modern Pokemon. I think this is the first modern Pokemon game, even though it's still in the old 2D art style. I'd give these games a 9.4 out of 10. Would recommend. Alright, on to number 6, Pokemon Platinum. It has been a long time since we've talked about the Sinnoh games, and rightfully so. This game deserves to be up here. This is a big upgrade over Diamond and Pearl in every sense of the word. It fixed almost every single issue with its predecessor. It runs a lot quicker. It expanded the Pokédex. The only thing it didn't really fix is the crippling HM usage, and you're still kind of forced to use a crappy HM Pokemon for most of the game, which does kind of suck, but it's whatever. Your team for these playthroughs can be more varied, but it's still pretty limited overall. Like, if you ask most people, they're going to have like the same 8 or so Pokemon shuffled around for their playthrough teams for these games, which I does think hurts the replayability of them. But for the first playthrough especially, the new story feels great. The going into Giratina's Dark World is awesome. The alternate dimension, though, it's not very fun on subsequent playthroughs. It's kind of lame, and it's probably going to be skipped for me, is why I wouldn't really play these games very often in a replay sense, because that puzzle is just tedious and it takes forever. But the first playthrough, it's really cool. The music is amazing. The final boss fight in the Dark World, at least, is really cool. The region is beautiful, and since this is the first jump, I would consider this the first modern Pokemon in the franchise. The physical, special, split, abilities, basically all the core components of modern Pokemon were finished off in this game. And I think the addition of all the new upgraded, especially Johto Pokemon that were pretty weak getting evolutions in these games, are great. These games are wonderful. I'd give it a 9.1 out of 10. I would highly recommend playing through these, though the replayability is why they're at 6 and not higher on the list. Top 5. Sword and Shield. This is probably the best modern traditional Pokemon game there is. This game is as close to the formula as you can get, and I think it's great. I know a lot of people would have these games lower, and they're not perfect, but I think it's pretty close to perfected the formula myself. The games run phenomenally smooth and play great from start to finish. The wild area has tons of Pokemon. Every playthrough you can have a completely different team with all different types, and you can actually gain access to all the types early in the game. Things like dragons and ice types that are normally late game only, you can get early, which is really fun. I played through these games probably 10 plus times with different teams of different types. The difficulty is not too hard, but it's not too easy. You still have to think, and there's a ton of good TMs you can get as well. The story, it's kind of whatever. It's not really great, not really bad. I don't really care for it. The new Pokemon are really good. The game runs well. The main thing is the 2 DLCs add a lot to this game as well. Like, there's a reason it's high up on this list, because I'm counting these DLCs as part of the game. And when you have those 2 DLCs, there's a ton of content in these games. And the Isle of Armor is accessible in your playthrough, so you can do playthroughs with Isle of Armor Pokemon, which just makes the Pokédex even bigger. So you can have probably like 400 something Pokemon to play through, which is crazy. They added things like XP candies, which takes down a lot of the grinding, because I haven't even talked about the generational gimmick yet. It's called Gigantamaxing or whatever, and you go big for 3 turns and you use moves that boost your stats. It's nothing crazy, but I think it's a good flow for the game. And then there's the boss battles in the wild areas, and you can battle a boss Pokemon to get TMs and XP candies. So it really takes down the grinding with crappy Pokemon. You can just do the boss battles with your strongest Pokemon, get XP candies, and boost them up. Not to mention, you can get Pokemon items like stones, and you can get stone evolutions really early. And with early access to the Mover Learner, they'll have really good movesets right from the beginning of the game, so you don't have to suffer with crappy moves. It's great. Not to mention, the game is pretty balanced overall in terms of the gimmicks. All the bosses use the Gigantamaxing gimmick, and I think that's really great. I definitely think it makes the opposing teams a lot tougher, especially if you don't want to use the gimmick yourself. It'll make it so that they're truly boss fights at the end of each gym battle. I definitely think the main downside of the game, which a lot of the newer Pokemon games have, is it has really long intros, and the post-game is horrible outside of the DLC. Other than that, highly recommend these games. I'd give them 9.4 out of 10. Everybody should play these games. Coming in our number 4 slot, our most recent regular Pokemon game, and that is Scarlet and Violet. I'm going to address this right at the top. When the game released, it was really glitchy, slow, and it was in an unacceptable state. But in its current state, on the Switch 2 version, it runs buttery smooth and plays amazing. So I'm going to be judging this game under the context of the Switch 2 version. If that upsets you or you want to move it way down because of that, go for it. That's on your list, not mine. But I'm going to judge it based on its current state. All that being said, this game gives you the most freedom to do whatever you want. It is truly an open world game, and I think that's great. You can get so many Pokemon within your playthrough to play with. You can deck them out with whatever TMs you like at the start of the game. I think it's awesome. It makes it way more enjoyable, so you're not using crappy moves just because Game Freak decided to give one Pokemon a good moveset and the other a bad one. This makes the game's replayability a 10 out of 10. I have 600 hours in Violet and 200 in Scarlet already, which tells you how many times I've played through these games. The DLCs are also great. There's a ton of content within both of them, and you can access the Teal Mask right at the beginning of the game as well, so that's even more Pokemon in your Pokedex right away. The Blueberry Academy is post-game only, and it's one of the best DLCs they've ever added. There's tons of double battles, which is really cool. And the actual post-game in this game, outside of the DLCs, is also great. The Pokemon Regions gimmick is my favorite in the franchise as well. It sounds simple, but the ability to change your Pokemon's type one time per battle per one Pokemon is really cool, and it feels fair. And the gym battles all utilize it as well, which I think is great. And it makes a ton of Pokemon who are crippled by their typing a lot more useful, and it changes the way you play the game. It's great. There is technically 3 storylines to play through, and you can play through them in any order, but there is no level caps, unfortunately, so there's kind of a static way you want to do it. But the actual gym battles are good. Outside of that, the other 2 storylines are cool for the first time, but there's tons of cutscenes and chatting, and it's all unskippable. And it really slows down the replayability, but yeah, it's just kind of how it is, unfortunately. Especially the Team Star section are pretty obnoxious. And the beginning of the game takes like 2 hours from when you boot it up to when you can actually just get freedom to do what you want. It's really tedious and annoying. Trust me, I've done it dozens of times. But that's only the real main downside. If you get past it, you have one of the best Pokemon adventures ahead of you. And since it's open world, you can do any event as well. So you can kind of skip gyms if they're too hard, for example, which is kind of cool. The music is good in the game, not that it's not good in all the Pokemon games, but nothing too special. All that being said, this game plus the DLCs is definitely worth your time and one of the best Pokemon games in the whole franchise. I'd give it a 9.6 out of 10. Would recommend to everybody. Alright, our bronze medals for this list. Pokemon Emerald. This is by far the best old school Pokemon game. No competition. Other than the lack of the physical special split, this is the definitive version of the Hoenn region. I would take this over the Omega games even. Other than missing the Delta episode, this game's got it all. It combines the story of Ruby and Sapphire. It makes all the gym battles a lot more competitive. A lot of the gym battles like Watson and Tate and Liza are a lot harder, and it makes them more enjoyable in my opinion. And the rival battle right before Watson, I think, is one of the best in the whole franchise. I think it's super memorable for me, and it's because of just how crazy it is. Other than that, the pacing of the game is okay. The obnoxious water section is still here, and it still sucks, but that's about the only major downside of the game. The Elite Four and the Champion are still great. While I do prefer Steven, I think this champion fight is still really cool. I think Milotic is a cool ace Pokemon. But there's not much I have to say that I haven't said in Ruby and Sapphire. This is the penultimate edition. This is one of the best games. This is my childhood game on top of it. So my nostalgia is cranked to the max with this one. So I'd give it a 9.5 out of 10. Alright, our silver medalist. As a surprise to many, I have Ultra Sun and Ultra Moon at the number 2 spot. I think these games are amazing. These are just enhanced versions with more content over the Sun and Moon games, but the enhanced content makes them way better in every way. The Pokédex is way better, the new boss fights are really good, I like the new Totem Pokemon, and the Kahuna battles are still great. These games feel super unique over the rest of the franchise, and one of the best parts of these games that no one ever talks about that I think makes them so high on this list is all the boss Pokemon have perfect EV and IV training. This makes it the hardest game in the franchise, bar none, because the boss fights also end up being 2v1s for the totem fights. They're well crafted, and that makes your team building and strategies have to be way better. The Ultra Wormholes are awesome. The post-game with all the evil villains is really cool. The final boss fight with Ultra Necrozma is one of the most badass and hard fights in the whole franchise. It's awesome. The major thing holding these games back that a lot of people complain about is the unskippable cutscenes in movies. They do suck, but you can just ignore them. I mean, it's just is what it is. It sucks, no doubt, but that doesn't tamper my opinion on them too much. I still regularly play through these games. They're awesome. I would highly recommend them to everybody if you have a chance. You are missing out on one of the best Pokemon experiences if you've never played these games. Alright, coming in as a surprise to no one, in our gold and ultimate spot is Black 2, White 2. There's no doubt in my mind that these are definitely the best Pokemon games in the whole franchise. Took everything that was great about Black and White 1 and just made it better. They just have every Pokemon in the entire franchise existence was added back in this game, so you can use Pokemon from other regions in your playthrough, which is great. There's tons and tons of battles. The champion fight goes all the way in the mid-60s, for example, so you can use any Pokemon that needs to level all the way up, and you can get their full potential basically unlocked by the end. The soundtrack is the best in the franchise. These are probably the best looking games ever as well. Like in this type of art style is phenomenal. This has the most content to do in any post game with the Pokemon World Tournament, which is probably the best piece of Pokemon content in general. It's got hundreds and hundreds of hours of replayability that I've certainly done in it. The only major downside of the whole game probably for me, especially when doing subsequent playthroughs, is the Pokestar Studio section is kind of annoying to go through, but the fact that that's the worst part of the game says a lot. And another thing I wish was easier to access is challenge mode. You can't really play it these days very easily. It's pretty inaccessible, but that's really about it. I know this video is starting to get long, so I don't want to ramble about these games any longer, because I could say a lot about them. 9.9 out of 10. If you could only play one Pokemon game, this would be the one. If you're going to tell someone to get a Pokemon game, this would be the one. And that concludes my list. I know this was a long-winded video, and the background footage might be a little scuffed. I just had to record something to put in the background, so if you see my iPad pieces, I'm sorry. That just happens. If you disagree with anything I said in the video, that's fine. You're entitled to your own opinion, and your opinion's not wrong, it's just your opinion. Feel free to share it down in the comments. If you start a war with a random stranger on the internet, just be careful. Thanks for enjoying the video. Leave a like, subscribe if you enjoyed this. I might make some more videos in the future.